Let me ask you something before we begin. How many empires do you know that lasted over 1,000 years? Not Rome, not Greece, not Persia, not even the British Empire. Yet deep in Africa, far away from European castles and Asian palaces, there existed a black African empire that ruled, adapted, expanded, collapsed, and rebuilt itself for more than a millennium. An empire so powerful that Arab scholars wrote about it with admiration. So wealthy that its kings wore armor of authority and scholarship. So resilient that even when attacked, it simply transformed and rose again. This is not exaggeration. This is the true story of the Bornu Empire, Africa's longest-lasting empire. And as you listen, I want you to think about this question. Why do you think empires like this are rarely mentioned in world history books? Before we continue, if you love deep African history that schools never taught, pause right now and subscribe, because stories like this are disappearing. Let's begin. The birth of an empire in the desert, the Bornu Empire, began around 800 AD, near Lake Chad, covering areas of today's northeastern Nigeria, Chad, Niger, Cameroon, southern Libya at first. It was known simply as Kanem. This region may look harsh today, but in ancient times, Lake Chad was larger, richer, and surrounded by fertile land and trade routes. Kanem sat at the crossroads of trans-Saharan trade, North African Islamic scholarship, West African gold routes. This location made Kanem powerful from the very beginning. The Sayfawa dynasty, kings who claimed divine origins. Kanem was ruled by the Sayfawa dynasty, one of the longest ruling royal families in human history. Their rulers were called Mai, meaning king. According to tradition, the Sayfawa traced their lineage to Saif ibn Yazin, a legendary Arab Yemeni hero. Why does this matter? Because it gave the kings political legitimacy, religious authority, international respect among Muslim scholars. But don't be mistaken. This was an African empire ruled by Africans with African institutions. The Arab connection strengthened diplomacy. It did not erase identity, Islam, knowledge, and power. Around the 11th century, Kanem officially adopted Islam. This was a turning point. Islam gave Kanem access to literacy and scholarship, diplomatic ties with North Africa and the Middle East, written records, and governance systems, religious unity for administration. But here's something important. Kanem did not abandon African traditions. Instead, it blended Islam with local customs, creating a uniquely African Islamic empire. This balance is one reason Kanem lasted so long. Let me ask you, do you think adaptation is more important than power when it comes to survival? Tell me later in the comments. Before we go further, if this history is opening your eyes, pause and subscribe. More is coming. Mai Idris Alooma, the emperor who transformed everything, one of Kanem's greatest rulers was Mai Idris Alooma, 13th century. Under his reign, Kanem expanded militarily. Islam was fully institutionalized, mosques and learning centers flourished, trade intensified across the Sahara. He performed the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, a sign of wealth and power. But his religious reforms also caused tension. Some traditional nobles resisted the growing Islamic influence, and this internal conflict would later shake the empire. Wealth built on trade and strategy. Kanem's economy was extremely strong. It controlled trade in salt horses, leather slaves, ostrich feathers, textiles. Caravans crossed the Sahara under Kanem protection. Taxes from trade funded the army's scholarship, royal courts, infrastructure. This empire was not poor. It was strategically rich. War, rebellion, and the fall of Kanem. By the late 1300s, Kanem faced serious problems. Internal rebellions, pressure from the Bulala people, political instability, over-centralization. Eventually, Kanem collapsed. But listen carefully, this was not the end. Most empires die once. Kanem did something different. Rebirth as Bornu, the empire that refused to die. Instead of disappearing, the ruling class migrated west and rebuilt the empire as Bornu on the western side of Lake Chad. This rebirth created the Kanem Bornu Empire. Same dynasty, same royal authority, new location, new strength. This alone is extraordinary. How many empires do you know that successfully relocated and survived? Mai Idris Alooma, Africa's military genius. Bornu reached its peak under Mai Idris Alooma's 16th century. He was a brilliant military commander, a strict administrator, religious reformer, a diplomatic strategist. Under Idris Alooma, the army used firearms imported through North Africa. Soldiers wore armor. Military camps were permanent roads, and fortifications were built. Justice systems were standardized. He famously said, "A kingdom can only be strong if justice is stronger than the king." Let that sink in. Law, order, and daily life. Kanem Bornu was not chaos. It had courts of law, written records, judges and scholars, women in royal influence, trade guilds, agricultural systems. Even travelers like Ibn Battuta praised African Islamic kingdoms for their order and justice. This empire was civilized by every definition. Europe arrives, and the balance shifts. By the 18th and 19th centuries, global dynamics changed. European colonization, slave trade disruptions, new weapons, internal succession disputes. Kanem Bornu weakened, but it never vanished completely. The Shehu of Bornu still exists today, a living continuation of a 1,000-year tradition. Why Kanem Bornu matters today? This empire proves that Africa produced long-lasting civilizations. African states practiced diplomacy and law. African empires adapted instead of collapsing. Nigeria was part of global history long before colonialism. Kanem Bornu deserves to be mentioned alongside Rome, China, and Persia. The fact that it isn't tells us everything. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Africa's greatest empires were ignored or deliberately removed from global history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story taught you something new, like the video, comment your opinion. Subscribe for more forgotten African civilizations. See you in the next episode.